Alright everyone, welcome. This is Mr.Business. And today we're talking about one of my most favorite words because it is a fun board game. All of us have played it. And it's a very interesting board game. A lot of frustration happens because a lot of people go broke because that's the only way people can win. There's one winner in this game. There's money involved. Alright, you guys got the idea what the game is? That's right, we're going to be talking about monopolies today, okay? Monopoly is what we're talking about. First things first. When everyone thinks about monopoly, they think they're all bad, they're all terrible. No, this is not the case. Not all monopolies are bad. However, there is a tendency to become evil and bad because you get a lot of power, okay? And we're going to go over that more. But let's take apart this word. Mono means one. Mano-y mano, one versus one. So this is one, okay? Right here, this is one. Right there. And then we have poly over here. We think of poly, that means many. So like polygon, many sides. So poly. So many. So what a monopoly literally is, it's one over many. Alright? Or in other words, you are the king of that business. Okay? You're the king of that area. And kings have what? And this is why how we determine monopolies. We determine it by how much power you wield. Do you have power to set and change prices? Do you have power to choose what the standard is in that industry? Okay? How much power do you have? And that's what monopolies all come down to. They all come down to power. And this is often based on market share. It's based on the resources available to you, the infrastructure you own. It's all about power. Okay, right there. All about power. So, I said earlier, not all monopolies are bad. Some of you don't believe me. You're like, no, if there's a monopoly, it's bad. And that's why we have antitrust laws to get rid of those monopolies. Yes, we do have antitrust laws, and we'll talk about antitrust. But a lot of monopolies exist, and you're using a lot of them every day. What monopolies are those? Well, in theory, a good monopoly is usually dealing with something like this. It's dealing with public works. Okay? Public works usually are big projects, okay? Let's give us some examples of public works. So that'd be like your water, okay? And your electric. Okay? And when you think about water and electric, would it make sense to have 20 different water pipes going to your house from all the different water companies? No. Would it make sense to have 20 different electric cables coming to your house with all these different electric companies in your area? No. Why? Well, because it takes a lot of money to build the infrastructure. And the people would have very little revenue because you'd be splitting up all this customer base. And we wouldn't be able to do it. It just wouldn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense to do it. So the biggest things you're going to look at here is going to be big projects. Okay? Things that require infrastructure. If you don't know what infrastructure means, infrastructure is basically the lines, okay? That's what infrastructure is. So if it be like roads, it'd be things that actually are needed to transport what's going on. So big projects. Okay? And there just wouldn't be enough revenue to share if there was a lot of little companies. So it's big projects. Typically, these are just given out legally, okay? There's very few instances these public works aren't done legally. Okay, so it's legal. And with it being legal, that means there's going to be regulations, okay? So your municipality, your city, or whatever, is going to be working with this company and basically tells them, hey, you have these standards you have to meet, meaning we need clean water. It needs to have at least be this clean at all times. Okay? In addition, they're going to mandate the profit, okay? Usually we call it a normal profit. They know that you're going to get this amount of money, and they're going to say this is the max you can charge, okay? So you have normal profit and standards. So just think about that. What if your water all of a sudden one day went bad? Well, obviously, this is failing, and this has happened in the past. People have not done good on public works. And that's why they have it legal, and they have these regulations and standards in place, so that doesn't happen. Same with electricity. If you have constant brownouts and electricity constantly going down, you're going to be mad. Also, because these are more necessary just for basic life nowadays, normal profit, okay? Like these are more on the necessity basis. This is what things people need, and we can't be charging them way too much more than what's actually needed, okay? So this is an example of most good, and it's what we often call a natural monopoly. It makes sense. Natural means it makes sense to have one person do this. Therefore, it becomes a natural monopoly. It doesn't make sense to have 20 different water companies, to have 30 different electric companies in your area. It doesn't even make sense to have 2 or 3, to be quite honest. So we have it be done this way. And the main qualifications, it has to be a big project. All right? It's going to be legally done, meaning the city is going to say you are the provider for water. No one else can provide water in this area. However, you must meet these regulations of standards, and this is the amount of profit you can make, or you can charge based on what you give. All right, let's move on. So, next thing I want to look at is sort of the history, okay? Some of the earliest monopolies we have had issues. All right, so here are the 2 companies. This is around the 1800s. You had International Harvester as one very well-known monopoly. Basically, they controlled all the harvesting equipment, and no one else did. And so they were making prices crazy high. American Tobacco, same thing, except it was with tobacco. And people just saw that their power over here, led them to do things which was not very good for society. It was anti-competitive, okay? So their power, and basically the main thing these people were doing is it was called price fixing, okay? Where if you own basically all of the chains of production needed in this area, you can basically determine the price and say, hey, we're going to make this a lot more than what it should be. But if we had multiple people competing, the price would be at a much lower and better rate for society. And it was just unacceptable. And basically what happened with this price fixing, people became, and this is a big thing, mad. Okay? Things don't change often unless people become mad. When people become mad, they then put pressure on the government to do something. And that's exactly what ended up happening with these monopolies, okay? This happened way back in the day. This happened all the way back in 1890. That's right, 1890, okay? And almost all of our antitrust laws are based off of this, okay? And it was a famous act called Sherman's Antitrust Act. Okay? Anti meaning against, okay? And a trust is a group of people, so it's going to break up a group of people or corporations or companies or whatever that has too much power. Sherman Antitrust. Okay? And this basically gave us the power to break up monopolies that we saw were being anti-competitive, that weren't allowing some basic form of competition where it makes sense to have competition. Okay? Oftentimes, the way you can look at this is this way. As long as there's competition, so you look over here, we have competition. And as long as that competition, okay, so we have competition here. As long as that competition is good, meaning we have normal prices, and we're looking at from this perspective and we're saying there's innovation, the government's probably not going to get involved too much, okay? But if they see a sector of business where innovations have stopped, where prices have gone crazy because of the way the market is, then you'll see a lot of antitrust coming into play. But however, all of this doesn't even happen unless what? Unless people get mad and put pressure on the government, okay? That's when things happen. So, as long as there's competition and there's normal prices and innovation, they won't get involved. But if any of these are affected, they see crazy prices, if they see a big lag in innovation, they're going to start to get involved. All right, next. What would be an example of a really good specific monopoly in the past that sort of just became, okay, sort of happened? And that would actually be Standard Oil, believe it or not. Now, oil, for the most part, we often think of them as shady companies, but Standard Oil was a huge deal because back in the day before Standard Oil, you had all these different companies doing oil. And if you're a small company, do you have a lot of money to spend on infrastructure and big projects? No. That means you're going to cut corners. When you cut corners, that's going to hurt society, okay? And what you had is you had all these oil companies dumping their oil literally just straight out into rivers, like the waste byproducts when they were processing things, just straight into rivers. You had all these issues all over. What Standard Oil did is they said, hey, come with us. We will work on the infrastructure, okay? We will get this infrastructure in place. And with this infrastructure, we will make sure that the waste won't be going into rivers, which is a big deal. I mean, we take it for granted, but there was a lot of polluting back in the days, and there wasn't really the EPA and stuff wasn't as powerful, and it was crazy what people were getting away with. Okay, so Standard Oil came in and said, hey, we're going to do the infrastructure, and also because they had so much waste, it was actually worth it to them to figure out what to do with it. Okay, so you have all this waste, and they sat there for a while, and because they had so much of it, it was actually useful to them to use it. Okay, and they ended up making, with a lot of the byproducts and waste, they actually ended up making Vaseline and things like that. Things that would normally be tossed out, they said, hey, we're going to change it into things, and we're going to make Vaseline. Now, one thing I want you to really think about on this, okay? So they made Vaseline. This would not have happened with the small companies, okay? If I just have a little bit of waste, am I going to spend a lot of time figuring out how to make it useful? No, I won't. I just toss it in the garbage. It's like right now, I have a lot of waste in my room. What do? I toss it. But let's say I had a whole lot of waste I have to deal with. Well, I might figure out a way to make it useful or to get rid of it in an efficient manner. Okay? So, this was very big, it was huge, and also just made things run a lot better. Okay? However, with all monopolies, is there going to be some other sides? Yes. Then there might be some anti-competitive behaviors and things like that, which people have to look for, but in general, though, compared to how the market was before Standard Oil became a big player, it was terrible. There was a lot of bad stuff going on. Okay? So, moving on. Let's look at another big corporation, and one that a lot of people know about. It's a U.S. company. In fact, that's what it's called. It's called U.S. Steel. Okay? U.S. Steel. Now, this company had tremendous market share. 70%. Except, this is what happened. They did... You guys waiting? What'd they do? Nothing. Okay? There was nothing useful that they did. They had 70% of resources, and guess where they saw all the innovation coming from? They saw the 30% of the people that were in the market. That's where all the innovation was. So they looked at this and basically said, if all the innovation's coming from the 30%, and those are the people trying to keep the prices down, and the prices are getting way out of control with the 70% that's not doing any innovation, maybe we have a bad monopoly. And that was the case, all right? So, when you think about it, going back to that previous graphic, where I talked about as long as they have normal prices and innovation, the government doesn't care. This is one of those cases where it's like, man, you can look at it and kind of tell this sector has issues. All right, so let's go ahead and do a quick recap. Get this all into one page of information. This is your take-home info, okay? So we have monopolies. Monopolies, and then we'll get to the question of the day. So we have monopoly. Number one, monopolies are based on power, okay? If you have significant power over an area, you can be determined to be a monopoly. If you can control pricing, if you control the way things are made, if you have restrictions on barriers of who can come in and come out of an industry, that's how they look at monopoly. It's all based on power, okay? You have two types. You have the natural, or as we like to call, legal monopoly, and that often goes with the public works, okay? Public works. Also with that, down here you have just the regular market monopoly, where if you get big enough in the market, then with your market share you can become a monopoly. And like we said before, the biggest thing they're looking for in a market monopoly, if it gets too bad and they're having issues and they see competition being affected, that's when this takes place, and you have antitrust laws. Antitrust. And remember, 1890 is when this started, and it was Sherman Antitrust Act, okay? Sherman. Right there is all the points boiled down for you. Okay? And lastly, remember, not all monopolies are bad. Okay? People always talk about, oh, this is a bad monopoly. No, there are good monopolies. However, because it deals with power, sometimes things get out of control, and until people get mad and get things to go, and that's why the Antitrust Act happened, things don't change. So if you ever see things like this, it always depends on the people whether things change or stay the same. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to our questions, shall we? I have a question for you guys here in the comments. Alright, so here are our questions. What are some examples of good and bad monopolies? And number 2, what are some famous monopolies and their impacts? I talked about a very, very small amount, okay, of monopolies. Think about it. What are some famous monopolies and their impacts? What are some examples of good and bad monopolies? I expect there to be a lot of comments, okay? This is a very hot topic in business. People talk about monopolies, rising monopolies, monopolies of the past. I want to hear what you have to say. And remember, if you got 5 minutes, you can learn business. All right, take care, everyone. Take care.